National oil companies, or NRCs, are really at the absolute heart of the transformation that is needed within countries, but also at the global level. As Laury shared, in many countries, but especially in the Middle East and North Africa region, NOCs are the largest collector of public revenues and also the biggest contributors to the public treasury. The fiscal health of many countries and their government's ability to use oil revenues for sustainable development really depend heavily on how well the NOCs are governed. NOCs are also huge players in the global oil, gas, and clean energy markets. NOCs are responsible for more than half of the global oil and gas production. They control the vast majority of reserves, and they spend 40% of the total global investment in the sector. Their actions matter hugely to the success of the global energy transition. Over the next decade, NOCs are slated to invest $2 trillion in upstream projects. Our analysis at NRGI has shown that much of this investment, about $400 billion, will only break even if the world blows past its climate goals. Increasing the transparency of national oil companies can enable more sustainable economies and can also contribute to this larger global dialogue around the future of climate and of energy. But to do so requires that NOCs report more consistently and in greater detail on three distinct areas. First, disclosing climate-related financial risk and the resilience of their portfolio to the dramatic changes in oil and gas demand. This information can help these companies' home countries better plan for the economic adaptations that may be required. Second, disclosing their spending on new oil and gas projects. Globally, this will help climate advocates to understand the so-called production gap between what companies and governments are spending on the sector and what's actually needed to meet the Paris goals. Third, disclosing the emissions associated with their production. This is necessary to measure global progress against the climate targets and to catalyze better low greenhouse gas production decisions. Strong disclosures and public communication by NOCs are especially important, as Laury said, now in this moment because of the uncertainties around the energy transition. NOC executives and government officials are considering various different strategic options for their countries to be able to build resilience to a decline in hydrocarbons that could threaten their long-term prosperity and stability. Those policy decisions should be informed by citizen voice and priorities. And citizens need information to engage in meaningful, evidence-based public debate. The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative can absolutely be a useful part of the transparency puzzle for NOCs. As Laury mentioned, QP recently became the first SOE from the MENA region to join the EITI as a supporting company. The EITI can offer a systematic reporting framework, especially on financial flows between NOCs and their governments, above and beyond the typical financial reports. And it helps put data into context, linking reporting to the NOC to the bigger picture on the role that extraction plays in the economy. And perhaps most importantly, EITI provides a ready framework for policy discussions and dialogue so that those reports don't just sit on a shelf, but really contribute to meaningful reforms. Unfortunately, we found that far too many NOCs are falling short of the transparency that's actually needed. In NRGI's 2021 Resource Governance Index, we've assessed the performance of 11 national oil companies in 5 different regions. The results haven't been released yet, but our early analysis does indicate that too many NOCs have been backsliding since 2017, when the index was last released. By contrast, Qatar Petroleum has shown that positive, timely change is possible when there is that commitment to reform. As my colleagues will share, QP has made important advancements in transparency and accountability. It is now on par with other SOEs in the region in terms of transparency, and in some areas, it's ahead of existing standards. While this progress is to be commended, as Laury said, there's always room for improvement. And QP can improve its transparency in line with the benchmark that is set by leading SOEs and by international oil companies globally. More detailed disclosures on fiscal transactions between companies and governments, operational expenditures, and commodity sales can help an SOE like QP demonstrate its value to its society, and also can help governments and citizens better anticipate change and to plan for the future. By seizing opportunities to accelerate their transparency and accountability, we believe that QP will see benefits internally, but also internationally. Internally, strong reporting systems are one of the most important tools to bolster management incentives for operational efficiency. QP can also model approaches for other entities, such as the Qatar Investment Authority, so that they might actually follow the same path. Internationally, we believe that QP's quest for transparent and efficient governance will actually help the company better compete for projects outside Qatar. QP's transparency credentials will attract the kind of international partners that are necessary to share financing and risk, and who are increasingly insisting on more robust disclosures. And like other global players, QP has an opportunity and a responsibility to raise its game and the global standards in reporting on emissions and long-term assumptions. In doing so, we believe that we can create a race to the top, paving the way for other state companies in the region and beyond to adopt transparent and robust governance. I must say it has been an absolute privilege for us to work at NRGI alongside QP executives on this journey toward greater transparency, and of course, in collaboration with our partners at EITI as well. QP has really shown the art of the possible, that transparency need not be inimical to state companies in oil-rich states. And we're really excited and looking forward to continuing to work with QP to reach a true gold standard of transparency, and to, of course, supporting other oil companies around the world to do the same. Thank you so much, Laury.
Thank you, Suneeta, for the opening remarks. And now, just to allow me to tell you that we are recording this event, so then later on, if you would like to put it on social media or and promote it. So just like to let you know. So our next speaker is Liz McGrath. So Liz Liz is currently our RDI, the Research and Data and Learning Director, and soon, like in a couple of days, she will be our Managing Director, and we're looking for her. We're looking forward to working with her in this new position. So Liz has worked on governance issues for almost 15 years with a focus on measurement in the social sciences and the composite index construction. And I remember the first time she came, it was for the RGI. We needed someone like her to really fix our methodology and work on the project. And definitely she made a great a difference. So before joining NRGI in 2016, she served as the director of the Ibrahim Index of African Governance at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. And prior to that, worked for Amnesty International UK, the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and national human rights organizations in Nigeria and Colombia. So Liz, the floor is yours. As we said at the beginning, today we're releasing QP's 2021 RGI scores. And as we mentioned, we have a kind of a history now with QP in working together on the RGI. So we'd like to hear from you about this history and the results for 2021. So please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Laury. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see the slides now. Excellent. So as Laury mentions, I'm going to present a preview of Qatar Petroleum's performance in the 2021 Resource Governance Index. And to give a little bit of background on the Resource Governance Index to this group, I want to first show a short video.
Effective governance of the oil, gas, and mining sectors is a persistent challenge around the world. If well managed, resource wealth has the potential to improve the lives of over 1 billion people living in poverty in resource-rich countries. However, the lack of transparency and absence of accountability in the extractive sector means that citizens often don't see the benefits of their nation's resources. Additionally, poor governance can lead to corruption, environmental damage, and even violence and conflict. Our mission at the Natural Resource Governance Institute is to ensure that countries rich in oil, gas, and minerals achieve sustainable, inclusive development and that people receive lasting benefits from extractives and experience reduced harms. NRGI's Resource Governance Index is a robust, evidence-based tool that allows stakeholders such as governments, civil society actors, private companies, and citizens to understand how well countries realize value from their resources, how well they manage revenues, and how the broader political and economic context affects resource governance. To create the index, independent researchers answer almost 200 questions regarding natural resource governance, providing justifications and supporting documentation for their answers. After thorough review by experts, NRGI calculates, analyzes, and disseminates the scores. Recent events and the accelerating climate crisis provide the opportunity for countries to build back better. How oil, gas, and mining resources are governed will play a key role in how societies develop. The Resource Governance Index tells the story of resource governance around the world and provides a roadmap for policy and practice reforms. It's a critical tool for those who aim to promote transparency, demand accountability, and drive reform in the extractive sector. This year, we are launching the newest edition of the Resource Governance Index, focusing on 18 countries. Country-specific data and analysis will be published on a rolling basis throughout the year. To learn more about the Resource Governance Index, visit www.resourcegovernanceindex.org.
So, as you saw in the video, the Resource Governance Index is a measure of governance of oil, gas and mining sectors in resource-producing countries. But understanding resource governance is only the first step. So we produce the RGI as a benchmark, a country and sector diagnostic tool, and ultimately as a roadmap for policy and practice reforms at the global, regional, country and institution levels. So as you can see here, the overall Resource Governance Index score is made up of 3 components. 2 measure the key characteristics of the extractive sector, value realization and revenue management. And a 3rd component captures the broader context of governance, the enabling environment. It's these 3 overarching dimensions of governance that consist of 14 subcomponents, which comprise 51 indicators, which are calculated by aggregating 136 questions. So this is to say a huge amount of data is brought together to provide a tool for reform. The RGI structure presents specific measures of governance of a few key institutions that manage resources. And one of the 14 subcomponents of the RGI is a measure of state-owned enterprise governance. State-owned enterprises play a key role in attracting investment, collecting revenues, managing operations, and selling commodities in many countries. And we therefore see it as important to assess these entities. And it's this subcomponent of the Resource Governance Index in which we assess Qatar Petroleum. So we released the last RGI in 2017, and this tool empowered and enabled public officials, communities and organisations to push for greater transparency, accountability and reform within the oil, gas and mining sectors. And as you've already heard from Laury and Suneeta, Qatar Petroleum contacted NRGI after the launch of the 2017 index to discuss the results, and this began an ongoing engagement between QP and NRGI on those parts of the index for which QP has responsibility. So I'm really excited today to provide a preview of the 2021 Resource Governance Index for the SOE subcomponent, which assesses Qatar Petroleum, over the period of 2019 and 2020. And I'll show how the results compare to the 2017 RGI. So, in the 2017 RGI, Qatar Petroleum scored 55 points out of 100. in the 2021 RGI, Qatar Petroleum has improved by 10 points to 65 out of 100. And this has moved Qatar Petroleum from the weak to the satisfactory performance band, as indicated by the colours on the circles. And it's important to mention that this score increase was the result of concrete and deliberate steps made by QP to improve its transparency and accountability. This slide shows the 10 indicators that are used to calculate the RGI score for Qatar Petroleum. So you can see that between 2017, the column on the left, and 2021 RGIs, the column on the right, there have been increases in scores for 6 of the major 10 indicators. And although 3 of these indicators remain the same, one of these scored 100 points in both years. There was one indicator where we saw a decline. And I want to use this preview presentation today just to go into a little bit more detail about some of these 10 indicators that make up the SOE subcomponent of the RGI. In the 2021 RGI, Qatar Petroleum improved in the disclosure of transfers to the government, with both the government portal of the Ministry of Finance and QP's 2019 annual report disclosing in full the revenues transferred from the oil and gas sector to the government. And really positively, this closed the gap between the law governing the fiscal transfers between the government and QP and the implementation of the rules. So this gap we'd seen in the 2017 RGI has been closed since that time. Moving on, in the 2021 RGI, Qatar Petroleum achieves a 100 score when it comes to SOE financial reporting practice. So this indicator captures whether an external body audits the financial statements, that an annual report on finances and operations is published, and that the report includes a balance sheet statement and cash flow statement. However, it should be noted that there are not laws in place that make it a requirement that QP publish an annual report. So having good practices without rules backing them up may lead to easier reversals of progress, and putting in formal rules is advised. In its 2019 annual report, QP also disclosed both aggregate production and aggregate sales volumes, as well as all joint ventures that it is part of and the interest levels held. The only element of this measure where QP falls down, according to the RGI, is that it does not publicly disclose the costs and revenues deriving from its subsidiaries. There is also room for improvement in the RGI in the indicator on corporate governance practice, in which QP scores 60 out of 100. So while QP has a publicly available code of conduct, the Board of Directors does not comply with the RGI requirement that the majority of the SOE's Board of Directors is independent of the government. That is, at least half of all board members do not hold positions in the current government. So now, moving on to the areas where NRGI thinks that Qatar Petroleum has room for improvement. In the 2021 RGI, Qatar Petroleum receives failing, according to our performance bands, scores for both commodity sales rules and disclosures, as it did in the 2017 RGI. So there are no rules in place governing how QP should select buyers of its production or what procedures it should follow when selling its oil and gas products. Furthermore, there's no requirement in place for either the government or QP to publicly disclose information on sales of production. In terms of disclosures, only aggregate data on sales volumes and values is published, and no information is available on who production is sold to. So NRGI encourages QP and the government of Qatar to enact rules governing production sales to enable greater transparency of the volumes and revenues that are obtained from the nation's oil and gas resources. Understanding how buyers are selected and at what price production is sold to them is critical to help avoid corruption and to improve accountability in the sector. In line with best practice, QP could begin disclosing information on this, including details disaggregated down to each individual sale. So now I come back to a slide from the beginning of the presentation that shows how much improvement QP has made in the Resource Governance Index between the 2017 and 2021 versions. Tomorrow, we will publish Qatar's full results, the Resource Governance Index, including a country profile and all underlying data and documentation that we used in our research. And we really hope that the 2021 Resource Governance Index will provide key change makers in Qatar and in the region and around the world with tools to drive greater transparency, accountability and reform in the resource governance sector. It has been a privilege to work so closely with Qatar Petroleum on the Resource Governance Index, and we look forward to continuing our engagement and to discuss these RGI findings in detail and to move directly to further improvements in resource governance. Thank you. Thanks, Laury.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for this presentation. And I guess congratulations for Qatar Petroleum for the improvement and the 10 points, additional 10 points. And I guess like with what Suneeta said, like it takes will for reform to happen. Again, like as you mentioned, concrete and deliberate steps have made this possible. So it's not by chance that these improvements happen. There are people who are behind it that make it happen and work for it. And we would like to congratulate QP for all the actions taken for this improvement. So now we are going to our next speaker, Kaisa. I hope like the problem has been fixed with the camera. Kaisa Toroskainen is our next speaker. And she is our former program officer and consultant at NRGI. She has worked several years on the mining, oil, and oil sector economic development and governance, including SOE transparency at the international level and in Africa. She is currently working as a technical advisor at GIZ, but she was kind enough to accept to be on this webinar and to talk about the paper. So actually, as I said earlier, when we heard about Qatar Petroleum becoming an EITI supporter as a company, we wanted to understand more and understand why would Qatar Petroleum do that and what it means. So today I think Kaisa will explain to us like what does it mean to be an EITI supporter as a company. And why is transparency good for business? Because in the paper, we're making that case, the business case for transparency. And what is it that we are recommending? And we definitely want, we would share with all the participants the link to the paper, because I think it's a very nice paper. You can even read it in the morning with your coffee. So it's very enjoyable reading. So Kaisa, take us through this the paper. What does this whole thing mean? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Laury, and thank you for the opportunity to, first of all, conduct this research together with Qatar Petroleum and EITI and NRGI, and to join the discussion today to share some of the findings. Congratulations to Qatar Petroleum on the improvement, and indeed one of the concrete actions that Qatar Petroleum has done to improve reporting is to join the EITI as the first supporting company from the MENA region as an SOE. So this paper that we wrote sought to explore how becoming an EITI supporting company can help SOEs, in particular from the MENA region, to improve their reporting practices in the changing context in which they operate. And as has already been mentioned several times, Qatar Petroleum's pioneering approach is a fascinating case study, and it comes with some valuable recommendations, hopefully, to the EITI, to other state-owned enterprises from the region, as well as Qatar Petroleum itself. Before going to those findings and recommendations, it's probably just useful to recap what are the EITI supporting company expectations in comparison to the full EITI standard, just that we're all clear on that. So in the extractive industries, the EITI standard, which is implemented by countries, is of course a key set of disclosures to observe. However, the EITI supporting company expectations are slightly different from the full EITI standard in that they apply to companies that voluntarily decide to become EITI supporting companies as standalone corporate entities, independent of the decisions to implement the EITI standard by countries in which they operate, or their home governments in the case of state-owned enterprises. The expectations for EITI supporting companies cover a number of disclosures from taxes and other payments to governments, beneficial owners, contracts and licenses, and so forth, and also a general commitment to transparency, sustainable development, and integrity in their operations. However, the expectations don't include a similar assessment mechanism as the EITI standard at the national level. So with that introduction, what did we learn about the EITI supporting company mechanism through the Qatar Petroleum case study? First of all, as has been mentioned several times, Qatar Petroleum really has started an ambitious journey to improve its reporting because there is a business case to do so. QP's improvement in transparency and reporting support its business strategy, which includes elements like expanding operations abroad, being competitive in licensing rounds outside of Qatar, and attracting and being able to work with the best business partners. I'm sure we'll hear more of these motivations from Mr. Mannai in more detail. But in this regard, it's been useful for Qatar Petroleum to engage in the EITI supporting company process to associate itself with the EITI process in general, but also to benchmark its reporting practices and disclosures against the expectations set for EITI supporting companies. On the one hand, Qatar Petroleum has gone actually much further than just the EITI supporting company expectations. It has also sought to benchmark its practices against a number of other international standards, including the full EITI standard on a voluntary basis, the Resource Governance Index, as has just been discussed at length, as well as the Global Reporting Initiative and just general benchmark against leading practices by private international oil companies as well. On the other hand, the fact that its disclosures have been driven by a business case and a business need, as well as that the EITI supporting company mechanism is a voluntary mechanism. It has meant that Qatar Petroleum has advanced on certain disclosures much faster than others. For example, financial reporting has advanced quickly, whereas others like contract disclosure that seem perhaps less relevant to its role and mandate are yet to be implemented, even though they are part of the EITI supporting company expectations. So in this sense, the obvious recommendation that we can share with Qatar Petroleum is that they can continue setting the example and being a role model in the region and beyond by fully adhering to the EITI supporting company expectations, but also these other standards that can go further. It can also share experiences with other state-owned enterprises and international institutions and inspire other SOEs from the region to become more transparent, such as is being done in the webinar today. So moving on to other findings, the fact that Qatar Petroleum has already gone way beyond of what is included in the EITI supporting company expectations in terms of its disclosures actually shows that the set of expectations currently set for EITI supporting companies could be more ambitious. They could go further. This means both content-wise and process-wise. If we look at the content of the EITI supporting company expectations, one key element in which they could be strengthened is that they could include disclosures that are particularly relevant for the role of SOEs. This means things like the fiscal relationship between a state-owned enterprise and its home government, revenues collected from private partners of SOEs, spending of public revenues, as well as activities around licensing, for example, where SOEs are often involved. Secondly, the supporting company expectations could go further in light of the changing energy sector context, they currently do not include any kind of guidance on how to report on the energy transition or climate finance risk. This strengthening them in this regard would, of course, be particularly relevant in the MENA region, where countries are hugely dependent on the oil sector, and the SOEs control a large share of these assets. Further, some of the expectations could be more specific. For example, around procurement due diligence, we see that there isn't the content of the exact disclosures or the best practice required by the expectations is not very specific, and it's not actually linked to a disclosure requirement. So linking the expectations to the EITI standard or other existing good practice would it actually make them more specific and more easy for the supporting companies to implement as well. Then looking at the process, the EITI supporting company expectations would of course be strengthened if they included a mechanism of adherence and compliance of a sort. But the QP experience actually gives some very valuable lessons on how to go about building such a mechanism if that should be done. Because it's very important to keep an element of flexibility in the kinds of disclosures required, because especially state-owned enterprises have different roles and regulatory models, and the requirements should adapt to those different models. Second of all, it would be good to allow implementation and full adherence with these expectations to happen over a roadmap, as in the case of Qatar Petroleum, which is linked to its business, the company's business objectives, and realistic to implement in that regard. Finally, process-wise, the EITI supporting company expectations could be strengthened if they would include an element of multi-stakeholder dialogue and involvement of other stakeholder groups as well, as the full EITI process does at the moment. So my final highlight that I just want to mention is that the engagement between Qatar Petroleum and the EITI International Secretariat, as well as NRGI, is an example of quite a unique dialogue between a state-owned enterprise and an independent international organization in terms of providing fact-based benchmarking support and advice on what to disclose and how to concretely go about disclosures. And this is something that Qatar Petroleum has said has been useful for it. But it has been mutually beneficial to the EITI Secretariat as well, because it has allowed the EITI process to extend beyond the EITI implementing countries and have a direct impact and engagement with companies as well. And it has also informed the EITI's understanding of what drives SOE's motivations to disclose and how can the EITI be of better support to other SOEs as well. And this experience is already feeding into reforming these or fine-tuning these expectations, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Andrew in just a minute. So just to conclude, based on this experience, we can draw a few recommendations for other state-owned enterprises and governments from the region as they are looking into improving their reporting practices as well. It would be useful for companies, SOEs and governments to look at their specific business case for transparency, what kind of disclosures and reporting can actually help them achieve their strategic objectives. And then use extractive sector specific reporting standards such as the EITI expectations and others mentioned to develop those best practices, and joining also an SOE peer network hosted by the EITI to learn how to go about implementing these disclosures. Finally, we recommend that SOEs and governments actually proactively communicate to the wider public about their disclosure policies. Why have they taken a certain approach, and why certain pieces of information may not be possible or relevant to disclose in their opinion, and then of course engage on the content of what they disclose and publish. So use those disclosures to discuss their operational and commercial performance also with the wider public and not only their owners and governments. I will stop there, and thanks very much, and look forward to hearing from Qatar Petroleum and EITI on their first-hand experience on this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaisa. Again, even after reading the briefing and hearing you, it's still exciting to hear all of these issues raised and how these issues can be, or how these disclosures can be improved, and different mechanisms to improve disclosures and reporting from the SOE side. So I guess perfectly, so our next guest is Andrew. Andrew, as I said, is the Legal and Corporate Engagement Director at the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, and he advises the EITI Secretariat and implementing countries on the development of institutional and legal frameworks to meet the EITI standard, particularly regarding transparency on beneficial ownership, contracts, commodity trading, state-owned enterprises, supply chains, environmental reporting, and artisanal and small-scale mining. Prior to joining EITI, Andrew was a US-based attorney specialized in environmental and natural resources law. He's currently based in Oslo, Norway. So, Andrew, I guess you've heard Kaisa and recommendations, and definitely, as she put it, there is a lot to be learned from this experience, and a lot of improvement, room for improvement on these expectations, etc. So it is important for us to hear for you why it is important first for EITI to talk to the SOEs, to get their support for the initiative, and your assessment, as we said, like you had this experience with SOEs, with Qatar Petroleum. So this, like an assessment for the collaboration, lessons learned, and how to improve this collaboration or the expectations that we have, and what comes next. So the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Laury, for the kind introduction. After hearing from Suneeta and Kaisa, I've scrapped all my notes and need to readjust. First, at the outset, we commend NRGI and QP for the work they have achieved. That's a great achievement. It's really impressive to see the score improve over time, and really shows that the work that's being done is having an impact. I also want to emphasize that enhancing transparency in oil, gas, and mining state-owned enterprises is a priority for the EITI. The case of Qatar Petroleum presented a unique opportunity for the EITI to influence transparency at an SOE outside an EITI implementing country. We've long recognized that SOEs often manage significant revenues on behalf of the state and face governance risks that are linked to inadequate transparency and oversight. As a result, the EITI standard includes requirements for disclosures on SOEs engaged in the extractive industries. We regularly engage with roughly 55 SOEs operating across 35 of our implementing countries. Despite this regular engagement, implementation shows that countries are still struggling to meet the minimum requirements of the EITI standard related to SOEs and their financial transactions. As a result, as a mandate from our board, we've increased work with SOEs to try and promote their leadership on transparency. We have facilitated peer learning through a newer EITI SOE network. We've also attempted to highlight the good case for improving transparency. As Suneeta highlighted, it sends a strong signal to domestic stakeholders, which are the beneficiaries, as well as to potential investors and business partners abroad. This can help SOEs in their business ventures by attracting reputable partners, accessing credit, and even more important these days, meeting ESG requirements, which is becoming increasingly important. Recognizing the benefits, public benefits in the business case, we've had several SOEs sign up beyond their implementing country requirements to the EITI, and these include Equinor, Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, and Staatsolie. In addition to achieving the requirements in the EITI standard, these companies, as Kaisa mentioned, must observe the expectations for supporting companies. I need not reiterate that, but QP, when they joined the EITI as a supporting company in 2018, thereby committed to these expectations for supporting companies. QP uniquely also went a step further by voluntarily agreeing to undertake an assessment of progress against the SOE requirements, which generally apply to SOEs in implementing countries. And they also, we looked at assessment of their progress against the expectations. Major credit is due to Mohammed for spearheading QP's efforts in this regard. And the mapping function was a first of its kind for the EITI, and we've now expanded it to several other SOEs, GNPC, NNPC, and Pemex. And it's a useful tool for recognizing gaps in public disclosures for the company to receive feedback and then discuss opportunities for improvement, because that's really the main goal. Considering, as Suneeta had mentioned, the prevalence of SOEs in the oil, gas, and mining sectors worldwide, our ability to enhance transparency in SOEs outside of EITI implementing countries in this manner is a powerful tool for global impact in the extractive sector. The reality is many of the world's largest SOEs operate outside of EITI implementing countries. The reasons for this vary, but often country conditions, whether it's lack of government interest, limited civic space, transitional governments, these impact or limit full implementation. I mean, I took a look today at the list of the major SOEs. It's Saudi Aramco, it's Rosneft, it's the National Iranian Oil Company, CNPC, Kuwait Petroleum Company, PDVSA in Venezuela, Sinopec. These SOEs all operate outside of EITI implementing countries. So it's really through this mechanism of a company signing up to join the EITI where we can have an impact and engage in specific work on transparency with those SOEs. Prior to the pandemic, we were experiencing strong interest from SOEs, especially in the MENA region. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we haven't been able to conduct the level and type of outreach in the region that we would have liked. I hope that increases. It's been a challenge in terms of developing relationships with SOEs, especially in virtual means, in countries where a lot of the operators, it's more of a trust-based operation. So we hope to increase outreach and really gain access to decision makers. Part of the challenge that we've experienced at the EITI is communicating the business case for transparency to SOEs outside the EITI community. This case needs to be made more strongly, and we hope that QP and NRGI can help us make this case based on their experience. And then with the energy transition and a contracting oil and gas market, SOEs who champion transparency should achieve market advantage, especially with IOC partners, and this advantage really needs to be highlighted. Our work with QP, and as a result of the paper that Kaisa just presented, as well as, and I'll get to this, revealed aspects of the expectations that could be revised to achieve greater clarity and to make the expectations more applicable to SOEs. Taking the recommendation right away, the EITI has actually gone through an assessment process pursuant to the expectations and has assessed all of the EITI supporting companies against the expectations, 62 of them. And we presented a paper to the board at the EITI in June, providing the results of that assessment. The results were largely positive. The majority of EITI supporting companies are adhering to the expectations, but it did identify a few gaps in implementation, largely concerning the disclosure of taxes and payments in non-EITI countries. Around 1/3 of companies were falling short in that area, and then also indicated gaps in performance, both with beneficial ownership disclosures and support for contract and license transparency. We are currently in the process of taking that work forward, first as a product of the paper to the board, and then also as a result that's now been made public moments ago in dealing with a complaint that was lodged to the EITI board. Companies have stepped up and made commitments to further adhering with the expectations, including considering what to do when a company is not fully meeting the expectations. So that's new work that we can expect, hopefully before the EITI board table in October. The points Kaisa made on the energy transition, very well noted, as well as developing more SOE specific expectations, and that's work that we're considering in particular to the run up for our next EITI Global Conference in 2023. Part of what we're looking at is expanding the scope for SOE specific disclosures through our expectations. We certainly hope, and hopefully on the, we're coming out of COVID, to reestablish outreach to SOEs, particularly in the MENA region, and hope to increase their participation in our SOE network so that we can improve disclosures across the region. We hope to prepare the same sorts of assessments that we prepared for QP for a select group of SOEs so they can fix in on areas for improvement. Key to this engagement will be generating the interest, building the working relationships, and getting the buy-in for management to champion the transparency agenda. There's certainly a real opportunity for SOEs in the MENA region to respond to increasing transparency expectations and demonstrate leadership on transparency. I think I will probably conclude there, but certainly remain available for questions. And it's been a fluid time at the EITI in terms of addressing these expectations, and happy to answer questions on where we're headed in terms of the assessment.
Thank you, Andy, for the intervention. So before, as I said, before moving on to Mr. Mohammed Mannai and hear from QP itself, just to remind everyone that now you can type your questions into the chat box, so then after Mr. Mannai presents his notes and his intervention, we will be taking questions from the participants, but please type them in the chat box. So as as we say, last but not least, we're very happy today to have with us Mr. Mohammed Mannai. Mohammed is graduated from the University of Liverpool with an LLB with honors degree in 2007. He then commenced his legal career as assistant legal counsel with Qatar Petroleum in 2007. After completing the BVC program at the College of Law in London, Mohammed was called to Bar of London, Bar of England and Wales as the first Qatari barrister in 2009, following which he worked as a bar at law with McGrath Chambers, focusing on international commercial arbitration and litigation. Following a brief spell in the mining industry as head of legal for Qatar Mining, Mohammed joined Qatar Petroleum as general counsel and board secretary. He has been holding that position since December 2014. Mr. Mannai, we are very happy to have you with us in this webinar, and I think everybody is waiting to hear from you about what is this road towards transparency, the transparency roadmap that Qatar has been going through, and what definitely would like to hear, what were the incentives, definitely the challenges you faced. I'm sure that it wasn't an easy road. I'm sure that you faced obstacles maybe within the company, within the country, and other kind of obstacles and challenges. But are you feeling now, are you sensing the benefits of this road towards transparency? And definitely we'd like to hear your thoughts finally on what kind of advice or lessons you would want other SOEs in the region and outside the region to take from the Qatari experience. So please, sir, the floor is yours.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Laury, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I think there's quite a lot to unpack in what you have said. But before I move to answering your question, I'd just like to emphasize how grateful we are as an organization to the time, effort, and dedication that we have seen from the NRGI and the EITI. I think I cannot emphasize enough how much we appreciate the input and the support that they gave us. We have really felt the benefits of that over the course of the past few years. And as I said, I think the benefits both to QP and the state of Qatar cannot be emphasized enough. So thank you very much for that. We do appreciate it, and we're very excited about the next few years. We have a lot on our plate, as I'm sure the team has communicated to you. But we are very, very much excited, and we are delighted with the progress that we are making being recognized. So thank you. Moving on to your questions, I'll try to take them piece by piece, if you like. Starting with the question why. I think it's useful to backtrack and provide a little bit of history and context. QP in late 2014 underwent a significant series of reforms and changes that not only affected QP, but the entire energy landscape within the state of Qatar. Now, while those were largely politically motivated as a series of reforms spread wider across the country, I think the timing was actually quite useful for us as the oil prices at the same time started to make significant downward movements, which added emphasis and sense of urgency to the changes that we needed to see. The results were that for the first time we had a full-time president and CEO, so chief at the helm, if you like. And he had a very clear vision for what the energy landscape needed to look like within the country, and got to work immediately doing that. By 2017, so between 2015 and 2017, the executive leadership team worked very hard to put together a strategy about what they wanted the energy landscape to look like within the country. I think between then and now, you can see that there are a lot of announcements that have made headlines all over the world about what we've been up to. It's been a very exciting time for us. But I think it's not only what we wanted to do or what we wanted to achieve that was significant, especially for our conversation today, but it was about the emphasis on how we wanted to go about doing it. I think in the paper that we're talking about today, one of the points that was highlighted was a sense of accountability being a key benefit of greater transparency. And I think for us, you know, while that was maybe the last point that was mentioned as a benefit in the paper, I think that was for us first and foremost. And so we were very clear that you know, embedding a sense of responsibility and accountability as being a responsible custodian of the hydrocarbon resources within the state of Qatar, but also a responsible global citizen, whether that came to ESG or whether that came to other practices, needed to be threaded into our strategy in a very express and clear manner, with very ambitious targets in that regard. So we were a little bit surprised, I think is the right word, when we in 2018 got the 2017 report. We weren't entirely sure why we didn't score so well. So I was sent as the emissary on behalf of QP to go and find out why this NGO didn't like us so much. And I think, you know, what followed was a very, very interesting and insightful period of, if I may use the term, courtship, where we really got to know each other a lot better, and we understood where the NRGI was coming from and where we were coming from. I think there was a period where we needed to communicate a lot, and I think that the term communication was used quite a few times, and I like that. I do think that there was a huge benefit to us talking to each other. I also think that, you know, that builds rapport and trust, which is essential. But I think the positives aside, I think when we left, when I left, I remember thinking on my flight back how am I going to break the news that if we continue with these practices, i.e., we had suspended certain disclosure practices and transparency practices, that we were going to continue to backslide, as I think was mentioned earlier in Suneeta's introduction. And unfortunately, I do agree with her comment that that is something we see all too often, and particularly in this part of the world. And I was pleasantly surprised that when I debriefed His Excellency, who has taken a personal interest in this, he set me the ambitious target of saying, Mohammed, not only do we need to stop the backslide, but we need to be leaders in this area, and we need to be regional leaders in this area, because while internally, everybody knows how we do business, I think the credibility towards our external stakeholders is an important part of achieving our strategy successfully. And I think that was a major milestone and a game changer in terms of the approach that we took in terms of improving our governance practices and transparency, and particularly. And I think if I can just focus on one point, it's the link between accountability and transparency that I think was made clear in that initial instance. So following that meeting, I met Andrew, and we got to know each other better, or Andrew's predecessor as well. And we started talking about the EITI and the EITI's role. Immediately afterwards, what we ended up doing was we put together a strategy or a roadmap about what we wanted to do. Now, I think fundamentally for us, and I can't emphasize this enough, it was fundamental that what we had learned from the NRGI and the practices that they had shared with us, as well as the EITI, needed to thread into what we had wanted to do. QP is very unique, and I think it presented an interesting challenge to both the NRGI and EITI to have a NOC coming to them almost with IOC level standard expectations or ambitions. And also, the constitutional makeup of the state of Qatar does not mandate us, does not obligate us, rather, to make these disclosures. So, it was really, I think, an interesting case where we were coming in, putting all of this effort voluntarily. And I think that's really a testament to the tone that's been set at the top, not only by His Excellency, but by our board of directors and His Highness the Emir as well. And I think, if we, our mission statement is to be one of the best NOCs in the world. And I think we have shown and demonstrated that we are willing to take that step, because it's not only about the bottom line results, but it's also important to show that you are willing to step up in how you go about doing your business. So you asked me about the challenges, Laury, that we faced, and there are plenty. I think I touched on some. I think getting buy-in is a fantastic point that I can't emphasize enough. I think the mind shift change is a significant one. I think selling the fact that that transparency and accountability will lead to better bottom line results, especially in this day and age, is something that needs time. And I think, from personal experience, we may have underestimated how much effort that needed at a senior management level. It wasn't enough that His Excellency had that view. And, we needed to get that buy-in and conviction at the executive level. And that took a lot more than we had expected, a lot more time and effort than we had expected. But the challenges and questions that came out of it were good ones that we had learned from, and that we had also conveyed to both the EITI and the NRGI. And I think I'm delighted to hear now, when I heard from Kaisa a little earlier and Andrew, that there is feedback and evolution, particularly in terms of having different models for different cases, which I think is a great learning and development in that sense. The benefit, however, that those challenges and the mindset kept improving over time, and we saw that the concerns that we had raised about the changing environment outside of Qatar were materializing. We saw what happened in terms of the push and the movement towards greater disclosure and climate-related. I think the word that was used in the introduction was turmoil, and I think that is an apt term. I think that from our perspective, being ahead of the curve in terms of having our reporting ready and on our website and publicly available saved us a lot of work in terms of our international partnerships and our international expansion. You know, we had documents ready or reports ready ahead of being asked to produce them. And particularly when you look at our upstream strategy to go into bidding rounds in countries worldwide, time is a critical factor. So having those sort of numbers and reports ready and publicly available and consolidated actually did make doing business easier, particularly because they were not necessarily related to the technical or operational aspects. Governments now put a lot of emphasis on your procurement practices, your diligences, your compliance with everything from sanctions to environmental laws. And so those are areas that are very much linked to the areas that we're talking about here. And so, you know, that did start providing us an edge, and that continued the momentum and building up steam and inertia towards changing the mindset and having a greater support for disclosures. You know, I was delighted that last week we were pressed for time. We were going through this very ambitious debt raising project, which we've announced yesterday. It's the largest corporate borrowing of any organization in the MENA region, closed at $12.5 billion on the basis of excellent terms for us, and we're delighted to be able to achieve that. And I just wanted to highlight that was in no small part made easier by the disclosures that we have taken and the transparency ahead of time, because the banks and the investors that had come in had a very, very good idea already about our sustainability strategy because of our sustainability reporting, and we had already worked to ensure that the work that we had done in terms of setting the narrative of the role of gas and how we perceive gas as a transition fuel for the future really paved the way for the narrative, and then to be followed up with the more finance-related credit story. So I think, you know, being asked to take a position in terms of what is your sustainability strategy, what are you doing for the environment, what are the reports, what is your position in terms of these reports, and what are your targets in terms of emissions. But ultimately, really, the question that's really being asked is do you acknowledge responsibility and accountability towards your role to what's happening in the environment? I think that's really the question being asked. And I think we needed 2 or 3 years to really understand that we had to provide an answer. We came up with an answer, provided it ahead of time. Obviously, it's evolving, and I think that paved the way for a really successful narrative to be set in terms of the debt raising and the capital raising having been done successfully. I think in parallel, we have a very ambitious sustainability strategy that we'll be announcing soon as well. And I think, again, easing the way for this approach to external stakeholders, I think in no small part is because of all of the work that we had done jointly with both yourselves and the EITI. So I think I touched on the benefits, and I think, you know, if you ask me what are the recommendations that I would give other SOEs, and that is to start early. I think, you know, we are in an environment now whereby it has become clear, especially with what we have seen recently. And in the Doha Forum a week ago, there were poignant questions being asked to the panel about whether it is activist environmental investors getting board seats in certain super majors, or whether it is courts intervening and making determinations on behalf of others that they need to work harder. I think the question that I posed a short while ago is one that they have to have a compelling and convincing answer to, which is, what are you doing to address the question of your accountability and your role, not only to your corporate citizens, to your national citizens, but also towards a wider stakeholder contingent with respect to the environment and the effects on the environment. And if they don't get ahead of that narrative will be set for them. I think on that, I think I have there are questions that the industry, and this is what I really appreciate about the way that the EITI and the NRGI work, is by having a three-way conversation between governments, the SOEs, and NGOs, is that the IOCs also have valid views that they should be able to put forward. Unfortunately, the momentum is so much against them now that they're not really having an opportunity to express them. And I think ultimately, they do pose a benefit in terms of the ultimate goal of having meeting the Paris Climate Accord, or ultimately really limiting the effects, damaging effects of the hydrocarbon industry or global warming in general. We still don't understand, or we don't still understand how the effects government subsidies has, for instance, in terms of skewing the economics one way or the other. So I think, the supply-demand gap, investment gap, there isn't enough investment now going in oil and gas. I think that is a concern, and pushing prices up, I think, is a concern. And I think, that the understanding how subsidies can benefit the transition, but also how they skew the economics, because ultimately the taxpayer is going to ultimately end up paying and subsidizing potentially an inefficient business model. So I think those questions need to be asked. They're fair questions to be asked. And I think super majors are feeling pressured to invest in renewables when and shareholders are giving them a pass in terms of the economics, simply because they are renewables. And I think that's not in anybody's interest. So I think those are questions that definitely need to be asked. But from our perspective, we're very much bought into it. As I said, we have a very, very ambitious strategy with very clear ESG-related targets, emissions-related targets. The vast majority of our production is here within the state of Qatar, and so first and foremost we see a responsibility towards the state, and so we take that very seriously. But I'll leave that for that publication and disclosure. There's an entire media campaign that's going in that regard, so I won't talk much more about that. But I do think that it touches on the point of buy-in in terms of the culture, because I think we should acknowledge that if we do not have a culture of engaging with third parties, and if we do not set the narrative, then the narrative will be set for us. And I think getting the reporting ready and getting it ahead of time will make doing our business easier, will set the story for us. People will know who we are, what we're doing. And what I've learned also in QP, and I'm sure this is the same with regional SOEs or SOEs worldwide, is that they are probably doing a lot of good work in this sphere. And unfortunately, it's not enough of it is being disclosed. In terms of, I think the last part of your question, unless there's anything else, was about expectations in the near term. I think we shouldn't forget that Qatar Petroleum is more than half a century old. I think the amount of work, even though the results are actually quite impressive on face value, I think the real success and the real achievement on our end, and I think being in the kitchen is different than the dining experience, as anyone would know, was that we managed to successfully make significant changes in that regard. And I think now it is a question about having a moment to reflect about what our stance is, deciding for ourselves what our stance is, particularly given, as you rightly said in the beginning, are not mandated or obligated to do that, but we do believe in it. We are bought into the overall principle and values that are presented, and we need to decide where we would like to sit in that conversation, and move in that direction. I think what has generated what was started off as a one-off project is now becoming part of our standard operating procedure. And what that means is that we are going to need to do this regularly, seamlessly, and we're going to need to thread it into our day-to-day operations. So I think the immediate challenge in the midterm for us is building up the capacity. I think we're doing that. I think the team that you've been working in now is actually undergoing a major reorganization to add capacity, to improve our governance and compliance practices, not necessarily transparency, but as I said in the beginning, this is part of a wider journey in terms of improving our governance and compliance practices. So that capacity needs to be embedded into the organization. And a knock-on effect almost is happening with our public relations team as well, and external stakeholder management. I think that is seeing a renaissance, if you like, and they're also adding capacity and developing their practices and processes so that they can continuously disclose and continuously engage external stakeholders and make sure that the work that we're doing and our missions and our reactions to the concerns that are being raised to us which we are listening to and addressing are being communicated effectively. So with that, I'll end and I'll hand it over to you. I don't know if I missed any part of your question. More than happy to backtrack and fill in if I missed anything, or to take questions from our audience.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this intervention. And as I said, please, if you have questions, type them. Actually, I do have a set of questions to ask, but let's take first the question that we have on the chat. And it says, like, yes, QP is today is a supporting company, but are there plans to have Qatar as a country joining the EITI? So this is one question. And I guess my follow-up question on that is, do you have this sense that what you are doing as QP is having impact on other agencies or corporation or entities within Qatar that is pushing them as well to better perform or go into this transparency road? You know, like there is always competition between agencies within a country. So are you feeling that? So I think like it is kind of related to the question that was asked by the audience. So is Qatar joining and competition within it?
So I think that's actually a fair question and a good one. And allow me to be frank in our answer. I think from our perspective, this journey in terms of transparency is a new one. I think we are still better understanding what that means for us. I think, as I mentioned, the results that we're seeing are very fresh, and we're really very positive about what we've seen so far, both in terms of the assessment and the improvement, which gives a lot of credibility to the collaboration and the work that we've been doing together. As well as with third-party stakeholders, whether it's access to financial markets, whether it's being able to protect our reputation and mitigate reputational risk, or whether it's to access new markets for us with our super major IOC partners, and to also make sure that we are able to keep up with their standards, which they are subject to. In this day and age, if your compliance practices, you're not willing to commit to FCPA or UKBA standards in terms of your dealings and undertake to make sure that all of your staff comply with those measures, then you would find it very, very difficult to partner with the super majors that conduct themselves in the top tier in terms of performance. So we are now getting to better understand that. I think we have always said that we will work collaboratively and closely with the EITI and NRGI to the extent that we're able to thread the targets into our strategy, but we will not do it for the sake of doing it. And I think that's a very, very important message that we need to send also to our internal stakeholders to make sure that we are doing things responsibly. and making sure that we do not instigate change for the sake of it. And so I think we need to take things gradually and in lockstep. However, I do think that the results that we've been seeing so far are very, very promising, and we are very, very delighted with the results that we're seeing. Now, specifically in terms of specific actions to take, I think the road ahead with the EITI is we're just starting our journey. We're in talks, Andrew and myself, about maybe strengthening the partnership. The first phase of that was volunteering to be assessed under the full assessment criteria, and I think we talked about that a little bit. That was a very, very insightful and enlightening experience. The next would be to maybe host more conversations, maybe here in Qatar, involve some more of our external stakeholders into the conversation and so forth. And then I think we will consider the next steps of what to do in our transparency journey at that point in time. So I think it is something that we are very much enjoying the journey, while at the same time making sure we keep an eye on making solid concrete steps and achieving the milestones that we set our eyes on.
Thank you. So before going to other questions, I guess one question to Andrew would be like, again, like when, as we said, you are approaching NOCs, and you explained why it is important. And I think going forward is more important to have NOCs involved, because they might be the last man standing in the oil and gas sector, right? And you name these big NOCs that are out of the EITI world, and therefore out of maybe these international practices and disclosure and reporting, etc. And as we said, going forward, that means, and with the energy transition and a lot of IOCs investing less maybe in the oil and gas sector, etc. So that makes it like NOCs will have the upper hand, and they will be providing the necessary oil and gas. But at the same time, you know, the EITI spirit is about civil society. It's about this kind of collaboration, cooperation. So how do you navigate that? Or do you get actually some questions about like, do you intend to, like after engaging with SOEs, do you intend to work, to push more the countries to join after their NOCs have made progress, or they were really supportive and open, like the QP, they were really supportive, and they were even helping to strengthen this expectations and the standards, and pushing even like EITI, you know, like I see what QP has done, pushing even the EITI to think about things, to push for things. So do you think that like, how do you deal with this? And I don't know if it is a dilemma, but how do you deal with this situation?
Well, first, when Mohammed and I first talked, he did say that, you know, this was a long-term question for Qatar, you know, which I heard Qatar would sign up by the time the World Cup occurred, but I know that's not what Mohammed said. It is a long-term vision. At the EITI, we recognize that, I mean, these disclosures have significant public benefit. So even the smallest steps really do have public benefit, and in that way benefit civic society, even in countries where there may be limited space. You know, Qatar is making that journey, and going further, we're starting to see, you know, companies like Saudi Aramco with their initial public offering starting to put more information out into the public. And we do want to seize on that. We do want to increase that. It has significant public benefit, the more information that's provided, and does fuel civic space. So, you know, people within the country can have a say in the debate about how the resources are used, as well as outside NGOs. So we're encouraging that sort of disclosure, and certainly hope that other SOEs in the region step up. But we're also seeing, you know, as in the case of, say, Lebanon in the region, it's civil society that's often leading some of these charges for in certain areas, and we do get a lot of inquiries. So it's happening on both ends. It's not just a company movement, but it's also a civil society movement, and we're responding to both, and hopefully that they converge on both the corporate and civic space front, and we can hopefully engage more. But yeah, it's exciting what Qatar has done. It's exciting. We hope to sign up Lebanon in the near future, and there's certainly more interest, including from difficult operating areas like Libya, where their SOE has reached out to us before.
Yes, thank you for that. So I think we are seeing in the chat as well. Adit Mowensi from Suriname saying that Suriname became part of EITI with the support of one of the supporting companies of EITI. So they had a leading role and really supported all initiatives of stakeholders in the country. Finally, we had a very successful implementation. QP can play a key role in this trajectory. So I guess like it is in the spirit of definitely this journey, QP's journey, might have a spillover over the country, and definitely we're looking forward for the region as well. As we said, like the region is really the core of, and the NOCs in the region are really international players. So definitely they need to be up to the standard going forward, and with all the changes that are happening. We do have another question to Mohammed. Do you think the country's legislations will change to catch up to QP's initiatives? That's good. I think it's with the practice and law question within RGI. So do you think, like, with everything that you're doing, so then the country will catch up and really draft and ratify legislations based on the practices that you are really entrenching and practices that you are practicing in this world?
That's a great question, and personally, not only throughout my experience on the transparency front, but also as a practicing lawyer, I think that we have to take a step back. And I think, while yes, there is an argument to be made that having a hardwired law mandating disclosure is a useful way of holding organizations to account, I think we should not forget the fact that there are often cases where laws are simply not complied with, and the measures to enforce the compliance with those laws are simply not there or not accessible. And so I think it is not a silver bullet solution. I think what one should look for is building a groundswell where that is an expectation from external stakeholders, and the external stakeholders have a means of pressuring organizations, whether it's through civil society, journalism, the law, their elected or non-elected representatives, into emphasizing the importance of disclosure. And I think the only way that is done is by showing that there is a benefit for everybody involved. And I think for us, it's not the first time that QP has really been not only the national but regional champion in this area. We're very proud of what we have achieved, but it is also something that required a lot of courage. A lot of what we had been disclosed could have been misused, could have been misinterpreted. And I think there is still a lot of trepidation or hesitation in terms of that as we continue our journey. But from what we are seeing, as I mentioned, I think that's very possible, very positive. I do think that people will see that that information is useful, beneficial. It helps us create a sense of accountability among ourselves, and then allow that to become a practice, and then become a habit, and then from a habit form a culture that we will then be expected to uphold. And what we've seen is that when there is a cultural or expectation or a behavioral expectation among the stakeholders, it's much more powerful, I think, than any bit of legislation from my own experience. Now, obviously, we would like the legislation to reflect that eventually, but ultimately it's the embedded values within the society that really will determine your level of accountability and the sense of accountability that is embedded within any major organization. There was a mention of the QIA.
Yes,
Our minister, His Excellency, sits at the board of QIA. I do know that they are looking at this very, very closely, but I do think that there is a tension that they face that we also grapple with, and it's maybe something that I skipped in my earlier conversation or this statement that I would maybe benefit the person who asked the question to thread that into the answer here, which is that there is a real or perceived benefit to having or being able to keep your cards close to your chest. Not having to disclose the arrangements you've entered into sometimes allows you greater room to operate, and that can sometimes be beneficial. I think the role, from our perspective, I think what we need to understand is that the EITI and NRGI is looking for trends over a longer period of time, and when you are transparent, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it ends up being more beneficial for you over a longer period of time, and I think we understand that. However, there are cases where it is to your benefit to not necessarily be transparent, and that's the truth of the matter. I don't think that is debatable. And so I think we need to understand where those situations are. We need to see where the limits of those situations are, and then explore being as transparent and openly accountable as much as we possibly can. And then, when we finally get to that remaining area, I have a conversation with the NRGI and the EITI about, well, how do we respect that while being as open and as transparent as we possibly can. And I think that sort of discourse needs to spill over to other organizations, and I think it will with time. And we've seen it when it came to localization, in terms of making sure that we have strong and effective localization practices that was very, very quickly adopted by the state. And so I think same came with ethics and compliance related practices, that the state is in constant communication with us about improving their administrative ethics and compliance practices, and we support them as much as we can in that regard. So I would not at all be surprised if there is a spillover effect. However, I think these things take a little bit of time, and it's with engagements like this that people will start understanding that a little bit better, and then having those conversations. But with the QA in particular, I do know that they look at governance and compliance very closely. They're definitely developing those practices. I know that for a fact, but the question of whether to go the next level and be open and transparent about it is a journey that they have to go on in their own by themselves.
Thank you, and thank you very much. And I think this was like a great point to make at the end, because it opens a new door. And it opens a new opportunity and a new engagement between NRGI and other entities in Qatar, definitely learning from QP's experience and the leadership and that has taken, and the courage that has taken, because definitely coming from the region, I understand like the difficulties that has taken for QP and the QP leadership and the staff and all of you to really make all these cases to the leadership and push the leadership to see the value of what you are doing. So our time is up. I want to thank you all panelists. It was really great and all of you, great intervention, very inspiring. I think that again, to start with the idea of it takes political will, it takes leadership, it takes courage to really go into these changes in, as you said, in culture, in behavior, and what NOCs have learned to do for years, because definitely the NOC world is different than the IOC world. And I guess like this is appreciated, and we see today that this effort that has been put by QP, it's rewarded in this RGI improvement. And I think this will be something that will encourage QP and other corporations and maybe other agencies within Qatar to really work for excellence and for improving. But again, there is always room to improve. And Mohammed, we're the kind of, we keep on pushing, and we are pushing when we really see commitment and engagement and passion. So we really would like to continue this journey with you and be part of it. And I'm sure like Andrew has the same, like as EITI, to continue and do it. And this, I think one last point is this communication between different entities. We come from a world with certain perspectives, with certain perception, with certain values, and IOCs come with different values, NOCs come with different perceptions, and this communication is very important for all of us to improve in the way we think. And I think at NRGI, we use this RGI to really build this kind of and construct this kind of space for us and NOCs, IOCs, countries, governments to think together and to put in each other's shoes. So as Mr. Mannai said from the beginning, this communication was really growing. We started saying like why they don't like us, and then they discovered that we like them. It's not like, and we have different views. So I think this communication we value, this space we value, and we will want to continue to nurture the space where we can all as multi-stakeholder stakeholders be together, think together to improve and to really push the envelope in the sector. And going forward, I think with energy transition and all the changes, we need all the support, each other to support each other for the benefit of the people at the end of the day.